So I tried every weapon in Season 6 of the finals and am going to be ranking them all from D tier all the way up to S tier. And honestly, I think this is probably one of the most balanced lists on the finals that I've ever made. I want to quickly mention that if Embark ends up buffing or nerfing any of these weapons, the pinned comment down below will have my thoughts and if I would make any adjustments to this list. Also, everything is timestamped if you just want to find a specific weapon. Alright, let's take a look at how I'd rank every single weapon in Season 6. Starting off with an absolute classic for Heavy. The Lewis gun is something that has been a staple of Heavy for a while now. It's reliable in both close to longer ranges and does pretty decent damage. The thing that usually turns some people away from it though is the higher recoil. This is an A tier weapon no doubt, but this season it's finally getting some competition from the M60. Speaking of, let's talk about that. The M60 had historically been considered mostly worse than the Lewis because it had both a worse time to kill and a shorter effective range. But now that it has had its damage increased, the Lewis finally has some competition. The M60 is the clear winner for those short range fights, and the mag size is much larger than that of the Lewis, but it does lose a lot of its damage once you get out of its effective range, whereas the Lewis does a bit better here and will once again gain the advantage. In my opinion, I think the M60 is a little bit better than the Lewis this season, but in practicality, I wouldn't fault you for running either of these weapons. The M60 also goes in the A tier. Now, Sledgehammer is one of those weapons that a portion of Heavy players will try once and then never use anything else. And you know what? I'm gonna say it. I think Sledgehammer is actually pretty decent. It might not be meta, but it's definitely one of the better melee weapons, and the arena destruction is quite helpful. It does have some drawbacks though, and doesn't feel particularly great in some maps like Kyoto, but I'd still say it's a solid pick and it's going into the B tier. Even though it has gotten some buffs in the past that have made it overall more consistent, it seems like the spear has kind of lived in the shadow of the much more useful Sledgehammer. It's got some neat gimmicks to it, but once you start going up against experienced players, Sledgehammer would be much better in almost every situation. It's definitely a fun and silly weapon, but is unfortunately just a little too niche for me to put it anywhere other than C tier at the moment. Now it's time for SA-12. This was previously an S rank weapon for Heavy last season, but this season I think it's gone down a little bit. Two things changed to make this happen. The damage got nerfed, so now it takes longer to kill lights and heavies, and winch canceling got removed, which was one of the most dominant ways to play with SA-12. Now that the damage got nerfed, certain guns like the Shack can now out DPS it, and since the ease of use got hit with that winch cancel removal, I have to move it down to A tier, which is still really good. I think that this is still one of Heavy's best weapons, but it does have a bit of a learning curve, so don't expect to immediately be wiping Diamond and Ruby teams the second you pick it up. The Shack has been steadily gaining popularity as time has gone on, and with the nerfs to SA-12, this weapon has some of the fastest time to kill on the Heavy class now. The only two downsides to this gun are that it relies on you staying within its effective range, and that you have to be very careful with managing your ammo, and to that end, hit your shots. So if you're confident in your aim and want some insane damage potential, the Shack is the gun for you, and I think that you can find this gun in the S tier. The KS-23 was previously at the A rank for me last season, but this season, I'm really not so sure. While the changes to winch canceling definitely hurt the SA-12, they hurt the KS even more. They also patched melee canceling a while back, which was another thing that helped the KS. They have upped the RPM to sorta counteract this, but the gun just feels weird now, especially with it being projectile instead of hit scan and close range weapons like SA-12, Cerberus, and Double Barrel all having high enough DPS to really make this thing have a tough time. That's not to say it's not a decent weapon. It is, but I don't think it's at the level of some of the other weapons on this list, which lands it in the B tier. Next up, the dual pistols. Some people don't like the dual pistols because in many cases, you want to be up close to your enemy when you're playing Heavy, and compared to other Heavy weapons, these require a lot more accuracy to do well with. But if you happen to be playing on one of those larger maps or are very good at hitting headshots, the dual pistols can do some really insane work, and if you hit those crits, they have some of the best time to kill ratings in the game, placing them in the A tier for me. Flamethrower is a bit of an off-meta pick that does really well in certain situations, but not as well in some others. In some closer range maps, if you run a mesh along with Medium who has a heal beam, You can get some really great sustained damage, and it's a great counter to teams who like to hold hands. However, playing distance and using a light with a glitch grenade can be a pretty big counter to Flamethrower. Additionally, it doesn't quite have as much DPS as some of the other heavy weapons. So while Flamethrower does have its advantages, it also has some big disadvantages, and it's just not quite as versatile as some of Heavy's other weapons, so I'm going to put it into the B tier. Now, Minigun is like the Flamethrower, one of those weapons that is a bit of an off-meta pick, but a lot of people are kind of writing this weapon off. I've been personally using this in ranked and been winning against some of the best players in the world. It is a bit limited by range and doesn't do as well on attack, but on the defensive, this thing is very hard to deal with and can be one of the best weapons in the game for just holding down a point. But even though I really like using this weapon, I have to realize that this weapon just isn't quite as versatile as some of the other weapons on Heavy, landing it in the high B tier. I do think it's better than Flamethrower, but it's a little too map and team comp dependent to be any higher for me at the moment. MGL is one of those weapons that's really fun but ends up being countered by just doing a specific playstyle. Notably, just never let the MGL player have height, and there's not a whole ton they can do. MGL is definitely a very fun weapon and is good against solo players, but once you run up against a team that has comms and knows how to actually play against it, its effectiveness does tend to drop off. However, Embark said that they will rework this weapon in the future, and hopefully that can bring it out of the C tier for me. But for now, while I think this weapon is fun, it's just not great and somewhat hard to use compared to the rest of Heavy's arsenal. Now moving on to medium, let's start out with the medium staple weapon, the AKM. This weapon has always been pretty solid, and that's no different in Season 6. While it might not be top of the meta, it still has very respectable weapon stats and is a very forgiving weapon to use. Not really much to complain about with this weapon, it's going into the lower A tier. Moving on to FAMAS, this gun has been seen frequently in ranked for a little while now. Its very good TTK against mediums and heavies makes it a go-to pick for many players, along with having some really decent hipfire. Not to mention the visual recoil has overall been reduced and new scopes have been added, which means the gun is now more accessible than it's ever been. This thing is definitely high A tier. Another assault rifle, the FCAR feels like it's been absolutely beaming this season with the recent recoil adjustment. And while this weapon has always felt really good, with the new scopes and these recoil changes, now it's a better time than ever to pick up the FCAR. While it is a little less forgiving than the AKM, it features mostly better TTKs and is the choice of many high-ranked players at the moment. I do think it's pretty comparable to FAMAS at the moment, and I'd place it in the A tier as well. Now, Revolver is a weapon that feels like it's been really power crept as of late. The pike and the repeater both tend to do its job, but better. It does do some crazy headshot damage if you can hit your shots, but the ADS does feel a little weird, so sometimes that can be hard. I'm going to put this weapon in the B tier because it's definitely decent, but is really limited in its range, and many other medium weapons just do its job far better, at least for now. But it is pretty cool though. Similarly with the Model 1887, it's in a weird spot right now because it fills this weird niche that other guns are just kind of doing better right now. If you want to run a medium shotgun, there's really no reason not to run Cerberus in the current meta, and if you want peak shots, the repeater is doing very well at the moment, but more on those weapons in a bit. Ever since the model's nerfs and the removal of melee animation canceling, the gun has really fallen behind in the current state of the game. And while it's still definitely usable, many other weapons just outclass it at the moment, landing it in the B tier. Now let's look at some of these other weapons that have been outclassing everything right now, starting with the Cerberus. Ever since its buff in Season 5, along with the nerfing of the model, this weapon has gained significant popularity for its high burst DPS. While many people considered it pretty decent at first, the higher level ranked scene really started to pick up on this weapon and have been showing just how dominant this gun can truly be. If you thought Light's double barrel was dangerous, a good Cerberus medium on DMAT can be even more lethal than that. This weapon is going to be one of the very few S tier weapons on this list. Let's talk about another weapon doing very well at the moment, the pike. It also had its damage brought up, and while it's not quite as insane as it used to be, it has a very respectable range and time to kill that's good enough to hang with the assault rifles. I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on the pike right now. Maybe because they're too busy running Cerberus or FCAR, but this thing can bring some serious value to a team, especially after the LH1 nerf. This is going to go to the top of A tier. Shifting focus to a bit of a more niche weapon pick. The CL40 did get some buffs this season that made it overall more consistent. While this gun can be very good against light players, it still has way too many counters for me to consider it a good pick for higher elo games, just like the MGL. This thing will probably do well in casual matches, but in ranked, a good team will easily counter it. I have to place this one in the C tier for now. Let's talk about the newest weapon added to the medium's arsenal, the Repeater. This thing is actually insane. If you want the peak damage potential of the old model 1887, but with ridiculous range, the Repeater is for you. I'm honestly shocked that more people aren't using this weapon because this thing is legitimately insane. Maybe it's because you have to actually hit your shots with it. Either way, this thing is like if you took Revolver and gave it more ammo and a ton of range, and also if you buffed the body shot damage too. And I imagine we'll begin to see a lot more people use this weapon over the course of the season. Now let me clarify something for you really quickly. Just because I think this weapon is amazing doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be great for you. What makes this weapon so strong is the amount of damage it can do while you utilize cover and movement to your advantage. But if you miss even one of your shots in a duel, it's usually better to have used an assault rifle. So while this gun has the potential to be, in my opinion, even better than pre-nerf model, it's very unforgiving and thus not for everybody. I'm placing it up here in A tier as I think it has insane potential, but it does require a ton of skill. Now to finish off with the medium melee weapons. Let's start with the dual blades. Unfortunately, these things are still in a very weird place right now. As I've said before, medium just isn't a very good melee class, and while dual blades have gotten some pretty decent buffs in the past, they get hard countered by a lot of playstyles and overall just feel super inconsistent to use. They're very fun, but if we are talking in terms of practicality, the dual blades are unfortunately going into the D tier. You can still get value with them, but I imagine you'd get more value with just about any other weapon. Now, unlike the dual blades, I think the Riot Shield does have a little bit more potential. It still suffers from a lot of the same issues as the dual blades, but not taking any chip damage while blocking is honestly pretty big when it comes down to it, especially in those higher ranks. And if you learn how to block while running with this thing, it allows you to apply more pressure than the dual blades. I still think it's niche, but because of these reasons, I'm going to place it in the C tier above the blades. It is now finally time to go over Light's weapons, and let's start things off with Light's 9.3R. This burst pistol has historically been looked at as a bit of a meme until Embark buffed it, hoping that people would actually use it. It's now in a pretty decent spot actually. While it might not be the best light weapon, it's pretty good from close to mid-range and has some fantastic hipfire, but to really do well with this gun, you have to make sure you land all of your bursts. It has a little bit more range potential than some of the more strictly close range options for light, but isn't quite the best of the best. It's a respectable B tier weapon. Moving on to the M11. This gun does some really insane DPS if you can get up close to people. Unfortunately, the Cerberus exists and makes getting close to people really difficult lately. This is one of those weapons that I equip if there's a particularly annoying sword or dagger light, and is definitely a decent weapon. Pair this with dash and you should be able to shut down melee users pretty easily. I'd put it in the A tier. LH1 was really the only gun that high-level light players ran last season, because there was really no reason to run anything else. But with the start of Season 6, it got some pretty big nerfs, which made it not quite as good of a pick. Especially with how good the Pike and the Repeater are right now, it can be hard to get the same amount of value that you used to be able to get. But that doesn't mean that the weapon is useless. In fact, I'd put it in B tier, but as you'll see later, I think there are some better options right now. Let's also talk about the sniper while we're on the topic of ranged weapons. That little change they made to it where they moved the damage up just a little bit, that really was a major change in my opinion, because now you have to be cautious even as a heavy against a good sniper, because a headshot and a body shot can now kill you. Now, just because the sniper is actually okay, doesn't mean that your solo queue no mic light teammate is gonna magically hit all his shots and play with his team now. But if you happen to get lucky and team up with an actually good light sniper, they can do some pretty decent work. However, it is a little bit of a situational weapon, landing it in lower B tier, just above the C tier. Let's also mention Bow, as this is the sniper's main competitor. This thing requires a lot of practice to get used to and usually utilizes a very different playstyle to what many are used to. It's got some very good burst damage, and a good bow user can absolutely make some insane plays. and I feel like it's a little bit more versatile than the sniper, especially in close range. I think it's a B tier weapon that can be pretty good once you put the time in to use this weapon correctly. Let's talk about some melee weapons now, starting with the Dagger. This weapon is pretty good in the hands of someone who knows how to do the 180 backstab, or front stab as some people call it. But besides this, the weapon isn't quite as intuitive as some of the other light weapons. Many of the things that you can do on Dagger, you can probably do a lot more easier or more consistently on Sword. While the Dagger is one of my personal favorite weapons, I do have to keep it in the C tier because while it's very fun, it is kind of a niche pick. On that topic, let's mention the Sword. This thing is probably the bane of many players' existence. I know both high and low level players rage a lot over getting killed with this weapon. However, if we're talking strictly in terms of efficiency, I don't think it's quite the best, and I think a lot of Sword players know this too, as many will switch off of it in the final round for a different weapon. It's one of those weapons that just does really well against a certain type of player, but then against other types of players, they can just completely shut it down. It's kind of weird like that. It's definitely pretty good though, and is going into the A tier in my opinion. Alright, let's just get this one out of the way. The XP54. This gun did get a buff at the beginning of the season, and is now widely considered to be the best weapon on light due to both its damage and versatility. It lets you play both close range and far range and have that mix-up potential that's really good on the light class. And honestly, I just have to put it in S tier for this season. Throwing knives are a high skill ceiling weapon that can do some really insane damage if you hit headshots. But if you miss a lot, you should probably use a different weapon. The change that lets you hold down the ult fire really made this weapon a lot better, and a good throwing knives user is really scary to go against. However, it does do pretty poorly at range and can be somewhat inconsistent at times due to the projectile nature of the weapon. I'd place it in the A tier. Now to touch on the latest weapon on light, the ARN. Initially, this gun was super bad because it both had some of the most aggressive vertical recoil and some of the worst DPS on all of the light class. And if it stayed this way, it definitely would have stayed around the C tier. But fortunately, they did end up buffing its damage, and now I can actually say after spending some time with it and getting used to this weapon, it's actually pretty good now. If you can get past that recoil, the range on this thing is really nice, and I would say it's a good pick for more open maps like Kyoto. I'd kind of compare it to LH1 in its current state, but a sort of automatic variant instead. However, the XP is still the superior gun in general, and for this reason, it's going to go into the A tier. Let's also talk about the V9S quickly. I'm surprised more people don't run this weapon because it technically has some of the best DPS values on the light class. Maybe it's because it's semi-auto and that keeps more people from playing it, but I'm here to tell you that this gun is in the high A tier for me. I honestly think a lot of people are just so busy using the XP or the ARN right now that they just kind of forgot the V9S existed. But if you are looking for a new light weapon to try, this one is definitely a really good one. Now to finish things off with light shotguns, starting with the double barrel. This gun has some really good potential damage and can be frustrating to play against at times. But now that Cerberus is meta, it's definitely a much more dangerous world for double barrel players. Also, Cloak did end up getting nerfed recently, and because of this, I envision a lot of double barrel players will move to Dash. And while this gun is pretty decent, a coordinated team who knows what they're up against can shut down a double barrel player fairly consistently, as double barrel players kind of play like sword lights and suffer some of the same drawbacks as well. I'd place it in the A tier. And finally, the M26 Matter. We've seen pro players do really well with this gun, and even then, I don't see many people use this weapon. Perhaps it's once again because of how good the Cerberus is, but I think this gun is still overall more consistent than the double barrel, and a good Dash Matter player can be really scary to go against, as it's basically a pre-nerf model on the light class. I'd place it in the A tier. And that was my tier list for the final Season 6. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments down below, or come talk with me in my community in my Discord, which you can find in the video description, and you can ask me questions there. And if you want to see when I release the gadget tier list for Season 6, make sure that you subscribe down below. We're getting close to 18,000 subscribers, and it would be awesome if we could reach that. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.